All right, we're back. Episode 2. Hopefully this time with 100% less echo.
Brought to you by Less Echo Inc.
Yes. That was an oversight on our part. But look, if you suffer through that, I can promise it's all up from there.
50 episode specialist. We'll re-record that one.
In a cave for even more echo. It'll be brilliant. All right, sweet.
How are you this week, Matt?
Yeah, I'm good. It's currently the 8th of April. We got a week until a bit of an Easter break, and then I don't know if you get the same ones over there, but we've got like 3 or 4-day weeks in a row because of all the public holidays. Yeah, that'd be nice.
I don't work 2 days a week anyway. No.
True. Yeah, good.
What are you drinking? What are you drinking to celebrate Friday?
Oh, what have I got? I have don't know if that's going to autofocus. It is Young Henry's Brewers B-Sides, and you'll love this one, mate. It's a watermelon and mandarin sour.
That sounds like absolute garbage.
Tom does not like sours. He is a Puritan. He only drinks VB and sometimes a 4X.
Other way around.
I joke that only a very small portion of people in the world are going to understand it. It's not even funny for those. Anyway, what are you drinking, Tom?
I'm on my second coffee of the day because you stitched me up. I got up early, prepared my little espresso. There's a Roca blend for the espresso, but then dogs needed walking, so I drank that, and now we're on to the Periquial blend this week from Packed Coffee. Filter pour. One episode I'll dive into the 40-60 method of pour over that I use. So
beautiful.
Anyway,
I can't
it's hot,
wait.
It's steamy, and it's satisfying my caffeine addiction.
Very good. All right, so this week, Tom and I are going to be talking about 2 things, or at least 2 things. We'll probably talk about more. A post that I read this week from Astral Codex Gen about different paths to AI taking off and becoming artificial general intelligence. And Tom is going to talk about a very cool post that he read about Hammock-driven development. So I'm looking forward to that. Before we dive in, we realized that we really didn't talk much about why we're doing a podcast or who the hell we even are last time. So we figured, let's do that. And if you skipped the first episode after 30 seconds of echo, you'll get a feel for who we are. So, Tom, why don't you take us away?
Well, I thought what we could do here, and I love just putting you on the spot completely, and so you can't disagree with me on we're live on air, but talk about why we're doing this recorded speaking to one another and why we wanted to do it with one another. So I'll start just to give you a 30 seconds warning. So basically, Elliot and I worked together. We started engineering together. We founded Maxwell Plus together. And probably 50% of the time we talk about work, and the other 50% of the time we talk about everything else. And I love speaking with Elliot about it because he is an engineer by background like myself, so his mind goes in the same directions as me. But he went a little bit further with the engineering. He went and did his PhD in biomedical. And Elliot's natural curiosity for everything is really a great sounding board for me. I describe myself as an ADHD puppy, and so thinking my own thoughts in my head is very difficult. And the way I think is by speaking. And as we've been working together for, what is it? I don't know why I looked at my watch, but about 4 years now.
Yeah, man.
We're coming up on 4 years, 4-year anniversary.
Yeah, I got the just to sidetrack us for a second. I got the clock I use to remember how long the company has been around is when I get the email that my domain name is coming up for renewal, maxwellplus.com, and I got that literally like 2 minutes before we started recording. So
hang on. My domain name?
Well,
Have you done a WeWork on me?
no, they are all on my personal account, but it's technically a company asset. That's true.
Oh god, oh god. You heard that hit? Someone save this recording so it doesn't delete it.
I actually have a document that assigns it as IP to the company, so I'm safe on that front.
Okay, good. Anyway, so and over that time, Elliot's become my sounding board for everything weird and wonderful across the world. And I feel often we talk about things and then I go and talk to other people who probably aren't as close to the coalface of tech as we are. And they're pretty interested in like stuff that Elliot and I probably talked about that week. So that's really why I wanted to start recording this. And the second thing as well is like, honestly, it's a slightly more productive use of our time other than we'd probably be talking for this long anyway today about these things anyway. So didn't really explain who Elliot is, but anyway, PhD biomedical engineering, good friend of mine. We're both from Brisbane. He's in Brisbane at the moment. I'm sitting here in London, and yeah, welcome to our podcast.
Awesome. Well, that's good. Now, did you want me to give a why I wanted to do it, Tom? Because I'm happy to do it. So yeah, I mean, look, obviously there's a lot of overlapping reasons. You got from Tom who we are, what we do, why we work together. I think Tom falls into, that favorite group of people that I know, which is we can pick up pretty much any random topic and go 10 levels deep on it and it won't get boring.
I think we solved it.
Oh yeah, of course. Especially if there's beers involved, we will solve most of the world's problems, and then promptly, proceed to do nothing about them. But Tom and I were sitting on a plane going somewhere, and we spent a good chunk of the plane ride trying to optimize how to better deliver food and beverages to people on the plane, with like putting rails in and all sorts of nonsense like that. And I don't know. It's a lot of fun. And hopefully it makes for entertaining content because, I mean, we have a great time and I think it's often very interesting stuff. And, from the times that we've shared this stuff through our writing or Twitter or just chatting with other people, it seems to resonate well. So we figured, why not take this on as a challenge?
Yeah. We can also both treat this as our personal journey of being less scared of having an opinion in a public place.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this podcast has been put up on a YouTube channel that I had created probably 12 months ago saying I am going to start making YouTube videos. And I renamed it to this podcast's name because I never got around to doing it. So I'm glad that we're finally doing that.
Good. Yeah, that's enough. That's enough about us this week. Let's jump into it.
Yep.
What are you talking to us about this week, Elliot? What are you presenting?
What are you bringing
to the table?
What am I bringing to the table? It's just a story of my life. This week, amongst a whole bunch of stuff around sort of artificial general intelligence and when it's coming and predictions around it and things, I read a particularly interesting summary from Scott Alexander on Astral Codex 10. I swear sometimes that guy writes so much stuff that it must be a team of people. But anyway.
Who is he? Tell us a little bit about him.
So I always get these two confused. So if I fuck this up and you're listening, Scott, I apologize. He's a psychologist, maybe a psychiatrist. I don't know. The more legit one. Sorry to whichever large portion of people I just offended. Yeah, I'm glad we do this in one take. Anyway, based out of New York, he writes under the pseudonym Scott Alexander, and he used to write on a blog called Slate Star Codex. Then one of the New York publications, could have been the New York Times.
He got doxed, didn't he?
Yeah, they have a policy where they only use people's real names, and obviously he talks a lot about things that, obviously he's not breaching patient confidentiality, but it may make relationships with his patients weird if, he's a public figure on a lot of outspoken topics. So he pulled that down, ultimately came back on Substack, as it seems is the flavor of the 2020s, with his new blog, Astral Codex 10. And he writes a lot about society, humanity, quite a bit on artificial intelligence, surprisingly, which is really awesome from my point of view. And this post was a summary and a review on a couple of different takes on how quickly AI is going to take off. We'll put it in the show notes so that I don't have to read the whole title, because it's a debate between a couple of people and one of them has a 6-syllable surname and I'm not even going to try. But I found it really interesting. So to give you the 2-second summary and end my ramble, and we can start to discuss it a bit more. The main premise is there's 2 arguments about how artificial general intelligence is going to come about. So for those not familiar with the term, it's when the AI gets smarter than us. And when it's smarter than us and we built it, theoretically it can build more AI, and it continues to get smarter indefinitely until, you know, it's as smart compared to us as we are compared to snails, for example.
And it's snails as well.
Yeah, well, that's all right. It'll
but
be
an
like,
important part of that is the speed that it will accelerate past us, right? As
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah. And I think the question that these 2 groups were trying to answer was, will there be enough time in between us realizing the artificial general intelligence is coming and it arriving for us to take the measures to make sure that its first decision is not eradicate all the humans? And it's very... He's got other posts on, I guess, more specific timelines. But what I found really interesting here was these sort of different looks at how these innovations come about. So the 2 main clusters were the exponential growth. So basically things are good, then they get a little bit better, and then you've got slightly more resources so you can do something a little bit better again. And this continuous improvement stacks up non-linearly, obviously, but that's what will get us there. So it can go very, very quickly, but there's a nice path to follow. The other one is described as the sudden FUM, which is where it's nothing, 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 and then it's there. And the rest of the post really talks about, I guess, the nature of innovation and which one of those is more likely, which I thought was very cool. I'm very much on the, well, I'm in a weird spot with it. I wrote about this a little this week, in that, like, I think it's one of those things where from the inside it looks exponential, and from the outside it might look very sudden. So there was that release of that DALL-E 2 network from OpenAI this week. I sent that to you, Tom.
Tell us about that.
So that's synthetic image generation from text prompts. So you can say, I want a picture of a astronaut riding a horse in the style of Claude Monet, and it'll generate you a pretty convincing looking image. Now, it has its shortfalls and things like that, but it was one of those sort of step function changes in our ability to do things.
And how is that a step function for
so
us laymen?
Yeah, I mean, historically we've had the ability to generate synthetic images, generate images from text prompts and things like this, but I suppose the quality here and the vastness of the prompts that it will respond to is pretty astounding. And you can start to think, to give an example, like Getty Images does a lot of stock photography. If you can suddenly say, I would like a picture of 3 people in a boardroom looking at a whiteboard, pointing at things and high-fiving each other over their success, and it won't just generate you that one image that is on all the billboards and you can't really use it in your marketing because everybody else uses it. Instead, it generates 500 candidate images out of nowhere, and you can pick whichever one you want. That allows us to do things pretty quickly. I mean, that's a pretty boring example, but you can imagine how that extrapolates to animation. Some of these images are quite photorealistic as well. Just generating a whole lot of content.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing to me about that is, like, the next step of that is like content production from a video and imaging point of view. So like you could be able to, people like me that could theoretically start creating moving pictures from it.
Yeah, 100%. I think, that breaking down those barriers is, to me, so interesting. Like just enabling people to have that creativity and, be able to make stuff without needing years and years of training. And don't get me wrong, like it's not perfect. And you eventually start to see the patterns and you think, oh, okay, fair enough, this is AI generated. But it does the like 80 to 90% job of it very, very well. And it's amazing. But coming back to the post, the post was written earlier this week, and a similar discussion in the post was around GPT-3, which is a text model. So you can type in some prompts around, can you write me a blog post about, XYZ, and it'll spit out paragraph after paragraph of text. And, some people say that was a step function, but then they look at, okay, what was GPT-2 like, and GPT-1 and other language models before that? And there's a pretty consistent linear trend. And there was a comment.
A linear trend.
Well, look, it's a linear trend over the fullness of time. So there's lots of steps there. But it's one of those things where, the day before the model is released, it doesn't exist. And then the day after it does. But behind the scenes, there was hours and hours of work for many, many people to make that happen. So it's a funny measure, I suppose, to measure things on. Because, when does the model exist? At what point do you switch up the capability curve? But there was a comment in there which was taken from the website lesswrong.com, and it was from the author of Gwern.net. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And he said something which I remember talking with a friend about long ago, which is that innovation in any field happens as a process of stacked S-curves, where you start off slow, you do all the hard work, you invent something, you release it, you rapidly exhaust all of the low-hanging fruit that thing can do. So let's say we very quickly replace all of the Getty images with DALL-E equivalents, and then we get to the territory of, you know what, this AI can't actually do this. It can't do animation. So that's kind of where it starts to stagnate. But at the same time, people are working on the DALL-E 3s, which may do animated images rather than just static ones. And then that S-curve sort of sits above the other one, and it starts to ramp up, ideally, when the other one is slowing down. And if you zoom out far enough, that's what makes curves look exponential. But behind the scenes, there's no such thing as unlimited growth. You got to have GPUs, you got to have breakthrough, you got to have work, you got to have data. And I think that points a lot more to the exponential looking improvement, but realizing that under the hood, it's not really a, tomorrow's DALL-E 2.0001. It's these sort of work on things for a long time, release them, and then we get a step up in capability. And we do that again and again and again, which gets us better overall.
So this is a really, it comes down to like, what's your frame of reference, right? Like, to be really boring about this, it's like, what are you putting on your x-axis? But so where do you see, where does your opinion lie with the state of AI? It's like, are we plateauing on a bunch of S-curves at the moment, or is there things coming out? Like, what's on the horizon? Do you even know? Like, I understand you probably don't know everything that everyone's working on in the world.
Yeah. I think we're going to hit some ceilings. We're going to hit some hardware ceilings. And, if you look back to probably 2020, when crypto was getting hyped, suddenly you couldn't buy a GPU. No matter what you wanted to do, all the GPUs were just gone. And you look at how little margin there was in the chip manufacturing industry, we're still playing catch up. You couldn't get a GPU, you couldn't get a PlayStation 5 because people bought up all these resources. And now these are the same.
Get a car.
Well, yeah, it's, and I think if the New Zealand government suddenly decided they wanted to build artificial general intelligence and they were going to invest every tax dollar into buying up hardware and making this possible, we'd hit a production ceiling very, very quickly. At the same time, there are plateaus starting to emerge around some of the techniques we've been using. Deep networks can only get so deep. And the reality is that no matter how good your network is, there's noise in the data. And eventually you hit a noise floor. So I think there's still breakthroughs to be had. There's still barriers to be overcome around hardware and other things that means that, we're not going to suddenly see artificial general intelligence, just appear overnight in the next couple of years. And I think, luckily, most of the world that is working on artificial intelligence in a very serious way is doing so in a fairly collaborative manner. Now, that might not always be the case, but I like to hope, as a bit of a techno-optimist, that the work on AI as it approaches this sort of super intelligence will be a lot like the space stations, in that it's neutral territory, it's for the benefit of humanity, and you better all play nice with each other because this is dangerous stuff.
Yeah. So where do you think we are in terms of where do you think the more rate limiting step is? Is it hardware or software?
Oh,
sorry, or hardware or methodology?
I think if you had unlimited budget at the moment, you'd hit a hardware ceiling faster than you'd hit a methodology ceiling. In the long term, is the hardware going to keep up with the latest and greatest techniques? We're yet to see. I mean, Google's built custom silicon, Amazon's built custom silicon, Facebook probably will too.
What is custom silicon? Is that the M1 chip and things like that? Or?
Yeah, well, that's one example of it. Yeah, like Apple's M1 chip. So, people are building CPUs, or, in Google's case, these TPUs, these processing units that are like super optimized for the kind of operations you need to do for AI, whether that be for training your AI or actually running them in production. Because, GPUs were designed to do graphics rendering, which, involves a lot of parallel operations, but they're still quite general in nature. So there's a lot to be gained by building your own hardware, as expensive as it may be. And it's practical if you Google or if you're Amazon, but if you or I said, let's build our own, it's not really a feasible exercise.
And so maybe we're going a bit off topic, but what is rate limiting about the hardware? Is it, for example, where there's we're never going to travel faster than the speed of light kind of thing? Like, what are the like first principle rate limits that we've got about current hardware?
Yeah, I think the thing that would stop us getting to AGI right now is not necessarily a technological barrier in hardware, which there are many. It's, how do we make transistors smaller so that we can stuff more of them in the same size chip? Well, the problem is that our manufacturing industry would pretty quickly cap out at its ability to produce compute power as quickly as we wanted it to. And then, these GPUs are power hungry. And if we suddenly ran as many GPUs as we could get our hands on in one spot or even around the world, our demand for power would go up probably quite significantly. You know, you saw some of these Bitcoin mining rigs like wreak havoc on the grid.
1%
when
of the world's consumption at some point.
Yeah. And, you know, by all estimates of today's methodology, the compute we would need to get to AGI is, you know, probably similar orders of magnitude to big cryptocurrency sort of usage.
Okay, so it's one of these things where it's like cost prohibitive to even think about. And I mean, when I say cost, I don't mean dollars, but obviously it translates to dollars. I mean, like we would basically have to shut down everything and direct every electron of power and every bit of silicon and copper in the world to making GPUs to be able to have the compute power.
Yeah.
Today, and until there's a radical change in either the cost effective, like the power effectiveness or the materials used, we're probably unlikely to hit the compute required for AGI.
Yeah, in 2022, that is true. I mean, we could find something that very quickly changes that, but there's nothing, to my knowledge, that's sort of on the horizon that's going to shift that in a drastic way.
So dare I ask, how does quantum computing fit into this?
Yeah, I mean, given the fullness of time, do I think the units that run these will be quantum? Probably, but current quantum hardware is, you know, it would not be able to do a whole lot. It's not general purpose. It has very limited compute capacity because it's just very hard to build quantum computers. Now, if we got some sort of Moore's quantum law where the, you know, power of them doubled every 2 years or probably faster, because if quantum works as it's promised, it'll be very quick. Yeah, we could have those very quickly. But we're still quite a long way away from that, I think. I'm not an expert in quantum, though, so I could be wrong.
Okay. So can you tie this all back together for us with where we were in linear versus step change, non-linear versus step change development of AI?
Yeah. So I think coming back to the original question from the article, which is, will we have enough time before the AGI arrives, the artificial general intelligence, before it arrives, to prepare? Because there'd be huge societal shifts that we need to make if these sort of tools exist. From the best of our current knowledge, I think, yes, there would be enough time, theoretically. There's probably a whole separate discussion of, you know, would we actually spend that ideal amount of time preparing, or would it be similar to climate change in that we'd, you know, put our head in the sand until the AI is knocking on our door saying, hand over your CPUs or pay the price? I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah. It's there's from what I've heard today, it sounds like we have more than enough time, and anything that managed to even get slightly intelligent, even slightly general, would run into compute restrictions pretty quick. But what worries me about this situation is like the human's inability to deal with non-linearity. Like, and you know, and something is half its value today and double the value next year is something like we're just not very good at thinking about. We think in linear trends. We're bad at extrapolating.
Definitely.
And we're all very good at procrastinating and individually and putting it off to the last moment. And it sounds like if the COVID pandemic's shown us is that humans are pretty good at doing that as a species.
Yeah. I mean, just one last comment before we switch gears to hammocks and things. I think there's also a very real fact that, like, I think the path towards artificial general intelligence comes from a lot of useful revenue generating products turning into more work. I really find it hard to believe that anyone is going to fund the billions upon billions of dollars necessary to just esoterically work on AGI. So it's going to have to have an ROI before it has general intelligence, which brings in all sorts of other sort of weird economic factors.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll save that one.
And it'll be and therefore it'll be a very, very specific application of AI that is very lucrative to a few number of people. Probably.
Yeah. But anyway, switching gears to something I'm very keen to talk about. I intentionally didn't read this article because I want to hear from you. Tom, tell us about.
Let's take it down a notch. Let's take it down a notch. Got a little bit dark, got a little bit deep. Talking about the end of the world. Talking about really smart machines. Talk about iRobot, and let's get in the hammock. Let's chill out a little bit in the hammock. So, something I came across this week. Not actually an article. It's actually a video. It's called Hammock Driven Development. And it's by this guy called Rick Hickey. Now, I'm probably going to butcher a few terms here, but Elliot will save me on them. He was the inventor of Clojure. That's correct. It's I think so. Language based on Lisp. Anyways, he's a software developer and runs a now successful company, created a programming language and runs a successful company on it. I don't really know what Clojure does, but there's Wikipedia. It'll let you know what it does. But he did this great talk, and it was in the 2000s, and it's this great video to watch because it's when you can tell it's in the 2000s by watching the video. And it's funny because they were talking about how in the video is how 2000s is cutting edge and stuff like that. And it's just funny to see how 20 years, how quickly things change. Speaking of non-linearities. But hammock-driven development is a problem-solving methodology is probably the best way to describe it that Rick came up with. And the kind of high-level aspect of it is that and what Rick implores all of his, I think he's speaking to his employees at this point, but the people in the audience to do is to spend a lot of time thinking about the problem, but being very cognizant to understand what stage of the problem you're at and thinking about that. And the reason why he wants you to do that is he wants you to think about the problem, but he wants you to hand it over, to your background mind, which is that mind that helps works on problems as we sleep, as we eat and having a shower. So we can more likely to have that eureka moment. So that's kind of the general aspect of it. And the reason why it's called hammock-driven development is he wants you to think, and the way he thinks is he goes and lies in a hammock. He says you have to be very diligent about thinking about these things. And, you can do it many different ways. You can go on a walk, you can mow the lawn, you can do something, but it's, you have to think about it. So it's a great talk. I would recommend watching it. It's 40 minutes, but it's very entertaining. He's a funny guy as well. But in general, he kind of he states the problem-solving process for him as step one is to state the problem. Just state it. He's one comment in that is the amount of times that I see people not actually working on a problem astounds me. And if you're not working on a problem, then what are you doing here? If you're not working on a problem, what are you doing here? I assume he means referring to his company, not planet Earth. After you've stated the problem, and in stating the problem, he says, actually state it, write it down, or even better, say it out loud. Just say it out loud. I am working on problem X. And he said that step alone can really help. And we do all do that, we all jump into the data sometimes. We all just start playing, start looking for things, looking for patterns, looking for trends, thinking we'll come to the insight by just playing around. And I think that actually has a place it really does have a place. It's just like exploring for the sake of exploring. But I think if
Mm.
you're working on a specific problem to solve it, figure out what you're solving before you start into it. The second step that he jumps into is saying, understand the problem. And this is where he kind of wants you to kick off your thinking, your hammock time. And he wants you to like start to think about, start asking yourself questions. And these are the questions about, you know, the usual things of like, oh, how much power supply am I constrained by? Like, or what's the budget that I have to work with? Or, you know, constraints, things that will constrain the problem and contextualize the problem for you. But he also wants you to start thinking about what you don't know, and also what you don't know you don't know. So the things you don't know about, and how you're going to go find those things. And he also says, start to look at what other problems there are. What related problems are there? Don't start from scratch. Like, someone's done something like this before. Someone's done it in a way that might be slightly different to how you would have thought about it, and that could be the unlock for the problem. But look at what other people have done, and there's a number of different ways you could do it. I know, Elliot, your natural inclination is to dive in to see what papers are out there on certain problems. And there's that all the way through to looking exactly at the problem that you're trying to solve, but also looking at parallel problems or similar problems. And this is where he starts you to want to, as I said, think about the hammock time. And for Rick, the hammock time, the important thing about the hammock time is it's a dedicated spot, and it's an action that puts you into thinking mode. So he goes and lies in a hammock because one is he can't take a computer with him because this was in the 2000s, so I imagine laptops weren't as big a thing, and iPads. But he says it's hard to have a computer in front of you in a hammock. It's hard to do much of anything in a hammock except lie there and maybe close your eyes. And so sit there, think about it, and think about how you're going to understand the problem. And it's really tough. And he starts his talk off actually asking me, like, when was the last time you sat down and thought about something for 10 minutes alone?
Yeah, for sure. Like, very rarely. I reckon this is why, like, I don't know if you get the same thing, but like you're falling asleep and all of this stuff just comes to you. You're like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Or like you just work stuff out. And it's the same with like, what do they say? Shower thoughts and stuff. Like, you just,
whenever I go on a hike, whenever I go, like, I quite like hiking. And whenever I go on a hike, like Elliot gets bombarded with like an email, like a 10-page email after my hike. Cause I'm like, just like, thought of all these things.
It gives me vibes of Cal Newport and his sort of walking between different coffee shops and stuff, and just like staying in the zone of the problem, but also like, just letting stuff like mull over in your brain and make those connections. I think that's cool.
And the other thing that he really asks you to do throughout all this is write it down. And a big part of this is understanding what step of the problem you're at. Like, okay, you know what? I'm in the stating the problem stage. I'm still trying to figure out what the problem is, or I'm trying to understand the problem. There's that quote from Einstein, which is like, if you give me an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And after this stage where you've understand the problem and you've probably had your first hammock session, he wants you to, you're going to be in solution mode. You're going to start a thought of solutions. So he wants you to actually consider trade-offs as well. So like actually consider a trade-off. He says often people just like gloss over trade-offs and be like, oh, it's not a trade-off. But no, actually like consider your solution and the actual trade-offs. And it's like, to have a trade-off, you need at least two things. And you need to understand the attributes, and you need to understand the deficits. So like when you have a solution and you choose a path, you have made a trade-off. Understand what that is. So he really wants you to like hone in on your solution, because he knows you're gonna jump in and solve it, but he just wants you. And then finally he repeats for like the 8th time in the speech, write it down. So write it down. Write down your trade-offs. Write down the defects in your own solution. Write down the stuff that you get really easily excited about, because that's the stuff that you're not thinking about properly, because you're excited about it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of two things. One is, have you heard about the rubber ducks that people have?
Yeah, rubber
like,
ducking.
on their desk? Yeah,
rubber ducking.
Which, for those unfamiliar, is like I don't know where the story came from, but somebody gave out rubber ducks to the programmers in their team, so that the programmers could ask the rubber ducks questions rather than come to the senior programmers. And the reason they did it was not because they didn't have time for these people. It was that 90% of the time, stating the problem that they're trying to solve out loud gave them that aha moment and clicked it all together in their head, which I really like. And I do know a couple of people that have had rubber ducks on their desk for that very purpose.
Yeah, we should get rubber ducks. We should get rubber ducks. For me, the biggest problem is like I just forget that I don't know what problem I'm solving. I think a little visual trigger like a rubber duck would help me.
True. It's easy to get into bike shedding or yak shaving or any of the other many weird and wonderful things that they use to describe just solving the wrong problem. But the other thing it reminded me of was probably incorrectly attributed, but that discussion about write down the 10 things that you want to get done. And it's like, okay, pick the top 3. And I think it was somebody talking to Warren Buffett, maybe some big financial guru, and the guy he was talking to says, all right, cool, I'll do these 3 first, and then I'll do the other 7 when I have time. And everybody's, no. These other 7 things, these are now your avoid at all costs list, because doing those 7 things half-heartedly are going to stop you doing those top 3. And I think in terms of like writing down your trade-offs and writing down the actual problem that you want to solve, like it's too easy when you're coding or doing spreadsheets or whatever to be like, I'll just do this. I'll just add this one thing. I'll just clean up this function. I'll just, maybe I'll do some formulas, summarize this data. It's like, yeah, but that's not the point of any of this. I've been in that trap. I've probably gotten that trap like 3 times today with stuff. So yeah, I think there is something weirdly powerful about that, like writing it down or saying it out loud, because it just becomes more real.
Yeah. It's to me as well, like the inside of this is like, it doesn't matter what you do really, like, but just do something. Don't just follow a process. It doesn't matter if like your process includes like do a rain dance to like pray for good problem solving vibes or something like that. Like, as long as you have a process and you're thinking about the problem, and like you're probably going to be better off than not having anything.
Yeah, for sure. I remember a discussion somewhere. I'll link it if I can find it, but it was about switching your brain between like manager mode and actor mode. So, if you're going to work on your process, put a time aside. Right? It could be. Someone who is very into Lisps, funnily enough, speaking of closure. But yeah, when you work on your process, you work on your process. But when you're doing your process, do not get distracted by trying to optimize on the fly, which is an easy trap if you're the same kind of person that Tom and I are to fall into. It's so tempting to build tools and optimize things and do spreadsheets and things like that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure something on my to-do list today is exactly doing both of those things at the same time. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, good. Well, lucky we said it out loud on this podcast, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And then so once you've stated the problem, you've understood the problem. You've been discerning about your solution. Obviously requires some more hammock time as well when you're thinking about like the actual trade-offs. And then the kind of final step that he jumps into is more input equals better output. And he means that from a feedback point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously there's some diminishing returns of feedback, especially when you start getting complete opposite bits of feedback. But he doesn't actually necessarily mean you have to talk to people about it or like present it to people. One thing that he gives you is look critically at other solutions. And he says, you're very good at crucifying other people's solutions. So do that. Find their solution and crucify it. And you might find your next best solution from that by being critical of others.
Mm.
And then he says as well as like when you're like doing your trade-offs and things like that, and you've considered your trade-offs, you got your trade-offs, actually make them trade-offs. Like actually make them. Actually make sure you thought about what the alternative would have been in that decision. So, and then once again, he says, write it down.
Yeah, I remember you told me something probably 8 years ago now. You said that you'd read, if you haven't given anything up, you haven't really made a choice. And a lot of people think they've made choices, but they haven't, because there was no trade-off. And if there's no trade-off, it's not really a choice. It's just movement that feels like a choice.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah. And I think the point is, if there's no trade-off, there's no thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say almost anything worth doing is going to have trade-offs.
Yeah. So those are kind of the steps where you've stated the problem, you've understood the problem, you've been very discerning about your solution, and you've gone and sought feedback, both probably from people, but also looking out there as to what else is out there. Each point's got the hammock in it, and each point's got the write it down step. And the reason why he wants you to do this is the reason why he wants you the hammock step is he wants you to have focus, right? He wants you to have focus and to be able to even think for 10 minutes on the problem. And so he has some few tips for that. One is say out loud you're going to the hammock. Let the loved ones know. Like text someone, whatever it is. Like I don't know whether he had text back then. Surely he did. But anyway, let people know that you're going to the hammock. He says, like, just define what your focus is and what it looks like. He's like, you can make it go for a walk or whatever it is, but like, go for it and like define what you're going to focus on in that focus time. And the reason why is he says you're going to be analyzing this with your waking mind. So this is the one that we're currently using, and he says the waking mind. I don't know how backed up this is, by the way, as well. I'm not a psychologist definitely not a psychiatrist or whatever Elliot said before. He says your waking mind is a very good critical thinker. It's good at tactics. It's good at pulling apart ideas and things like that. But he says it's prone to finding a local maximum, which is a really interesting point to me, which is it'll be really good at helping you get up the hill that you're currently climbing, but it won't help you realize that the hill that you're meant to be climbing is the one behind you.
Mm.
So I think that's a really interesting point. So he says, when you're thinking about this in your hammock, you're using your waking mind. You might fall asleep, but you're using your waking mind. And that's good. But the waking mind has its upsides and its downside. And he says what he wants you to do is he wants you to assign tasks, actually like physically hand over tasks. And I've been wondering about how you would do this in some ways, to hand over tasks to the background mind, which is kind of the opposite. It's much more of a strategic thinker. It's much more of it's very good at strategy rather than tactics. It's very good at wandering and blue sky thinking. And it's good at seeing all the landscape and seeing all the hills that could be climbed. And this is the one that we use when we're, falling asleep or we're doing something mindlessly, like having a shower and things like that. It's the one that's working in the background when you're not really thinking about anything. And he wants you, he says, you're not going to get the eureka moment from the background mind unless you think about it in the waking mind enough, which I think makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
Unless you think about the problem, it's probably not going to turn up into the background mind. So he wants you to think about it. He wants the hammock time to engage the background mind. He wants you to hand over something like, and as I said, I've thought about it, like whether I'd like physically pick up a book and like from one side of the table, move it from my foreground mind and put it in the background mind folder or something like that. But like, yeah, he wants you to engage that background mind.
Mm.
So
I like that model. I mean, I definitely think there are limits. I remember probably in my like late teens, early 20s, there was like a big thing where people thought they could learn French by like listening to French CDs in their sleep and stuff.
Isn't that from the Simpsons episode?
I probably was. I mean, I'm sure they made that episode because that was some popular nonsense at the time. But I think there are like, and to the point of this article, you know, I think those little eureka moments are just that final little linking of two things that happens suddenly. And then you go, oh, that's it. It's the same as talking to the duck. It's just two little things click together and then that's what solves it. And I think that's the good stuff. And that's why you need to put the time into it with your waking mind, because the back of your brain is not going to go through all the details and do all the hard work and teach you French. But it might make those little connections that, I guess, unlock a whole bunch of new insight.
To me as well, as I think it's this idea of the like waking mind is prone to local maxima, whereas the background mind is less so. I think that the background mind will, like, those two little things are probably two things that you can recite perfectly normally, but they just they're not in the same context to you. So a question will pop up from your background mind into your waking mind. I remember I was thinking about something with Maxwell where it was I had all these plans to, like, basically around growth and like help one aspect with it, where I was going to be like producing stuff to be able to like get leads from these people over here, like get leads and like producing all this content to get leads and stuff like that. And then I don't know why, but there was something that clicked and I was like, why don't I just go do that thing over here rather than do both of those things? Like, and
yeah,
it was and I know the concept that made me think that, which was do the real thing, which I think we might have talked about last week, but if not, it's the Scott Young. I got it right there.
Scott Young. Yeah.
Scott Young post. And I just hadn't thought about that, do the real thing, in the context of work. I'd always thought about it in the context of me learning a new skill or something like that. And my background mind put those two random concepts together for me and kicked me onto the more direct path.
Yeah. I'll tell you what though, like having listened to Cal Newport say a lot of words recently in his podcast and other things, it does really make me think about the value of like avoiding just like brain sinks. Like, it's so easy to just jump on and like scroll Twitter or Instagram or whatever else. And I think that stuff, like, I reckon your sleeping mind or whatever is pretty greedy for whatever it can get. And it'll just as happily link like two memes that you saw on Instagram as it will like the very hard problem that you want to solve. So you almost have to like starve your brain. Yeah,
I think you and I, and the waking part of our brain, is like, the solution to all my problems is jamming in more, I'm just going to say content, like more information.
Yes.
Which is like, if we go back to our list of 10 things and cutting out the bottom 7, is probably not the way to do it. Like, literally, I found myself this week, I was like opening about it, and I was like, oh, got to find something for this week, even though I had this already. I've had this for 2 weeks. I was like, oh, got to read more articles, got to read more articles, got to read more articles.
Yeah.
I've got it literally probably 500 things that I could talk about written down.
100%. And like, I think we've probably talked about this like half a dozen times this week. It's just like, it's so easy to just fill the silence with either distraction, like, you know, open up the old TikTok and flick through a few videos, or I guess the more deceptive, like, chameleon distraction, which is like, oh, maybe I should find some like health tech startup influencers and read all their content.
Yeah.
And like, it's so easy to trick ourselves that that's work. But as you said, you know, right at the start of this, is like, when was the last time you just sat for 10 minutes and thought about something? It's like, we almost don't let ourselves do that. You know, you almost feel guilty for doing it.
Yeah. I feel guilty lying down in the middle of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Guess what? I bought a hammock.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've got one
outside.
It's quite dirty. I need to clean it, but all right.
Alrighty.
For next week,
we'll do from our hammocks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good. We need one hammock insight next week for our episode.
Yeah.
Good. Well, mate, we are at, minus some dog barking that I will edit out, we're just shy of an hour. So to keep ourselves consistent, unless there's any other burning topics. Now, Tom, before we sign off, anything you want to plug? Any good books you've read? Interesting things? Fun toys?
So I've got a new book here. I don't know the brand of it. My little sister got it for me for my birthday. It's beautiful. It's Japanese. It's called Standard and Technology Stationery. Beautiful red cover and grid. You can't see it, but it's got a time on each axis, each y-axis of the page. Y-axis of the page. I don't know this thing. And then it's got a little date and year marker as well. It's just beautiful. I love it. And then I've got my new pen as well, which I got for my 30th from my parents, which is just makes me happy writing with it. So I don't know. Anything changed in the background for you? You got a blue light this week. That's very exciting.
I do. I mean, it was there last week, but I bought it just for YouTube. So I thought, you know what, I'll turn it on. But the cool thing that I have this week, just let me shuffle around. So I bought a MIDI keyboard and a synthesizer. It's something I've always wanted to learn how to do is play synthesizers. So who knows? Maybe one day our show intro will be my shitty synthesizer music.
Can we actually?
I mean,
your first song that you're not highly embarrassed about, that has to be our intro.
Or look, if we can change the intro when it gets better, yeah.
No. We're gonna go Tim Ferriss on this. The intro is gonna be the same intro the whole way,
okay.
even if it's lame and you laugh at it, as he said. But for those that playing at home who don't know, Elliot's not a half bad singer as well. So
it's been a long time. I don't know if I'll have vocals in our introduction, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe one day. All right, good stuff,
Minus
man.
Is here.
Yes.
Good. I just finished my coffee. That's perfect timing.
All right. Well,
enjoy
anyone
weekend,
watching,
mate.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll pop a whole bunch of stuff in the show notes. Midas also wants to say goodbye. But yeah, catch you all next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.